to thank everybody for coming tonight. I want to thank all the parents who tried very hard last night and whipped this lobby together, this atrium. They did a tremendous job. I'm really appreciative. And one thing that Andrea didn't mention, go by Andrea Evangelia, she's the co-director. So she just kind of came up here and said, "Hi, I'm Andrea," or whatever. Very, very subdued person. So thank you very much, Andrea, for all the work that you did helping put this together. And then, of course, I want to thank the Ari and Foti, Ari Kalageropoulo and Foti Stamo, for coming up with this idea together. And they do a lot of great work. I've known them for a really long time, and I think it's a great collaboration that we have, because in reality, like, we're the generation that should be doing things like this, and we're in the, it's our wheelhouse now. So right. I think it's appropriate. So great idea, guys.
Thank you, John.
I have the distinct pleasure and privilege to introduce to you Professor Samons. And where do I begin? Most of you don't know this, but I went to BU undergrad. I was a classics major, and Professor Samons was one of my first professors, and he became a mentor and a friend for many years now. He was a huge influence in my collegiate academic life, and he significantly increased my love of history. Another small little tidbit that Professor Samons and I share is we both belong to the Undergraduate Classics Association co-ed basketball team. And for those of you who know 1980s and 1990s Celtics, I would say that Professor Samons and I were the A.C. Earl and Joe Klein. Very slow, and that's about it. But seriously, he's the professor of classical studies at Boston University for many years now. I won't say how many. He's the former department chair and associate dean of students. He also serves as academic advisor and executive director of the Institute for Hellenic Culture and Liberal Arts at the American College of Greece in Athens. He's internationally recognized historian of ancient Greece, having lectured at numerous universities and other institutions, including Oxford University, the University of Edinburgh, the University of Pennsylvania, Brown University, Duke University, University of Richmond, Tufts University, Baylor University, and the Getty Baylor Museum in LA. He's published numerous books and articles on Athenian democracy, imperialism, finance, national character, and their relatedness. He's also the winner of BU's Metcalf Award, which is awarded the highest award for a professor to receive at Boston University, kind of like the MVP of the year. And if it were up to me, Professor Samons, you'd win it every year, but even Michael Jordan didn't win it every year. Recently, in the fall, he was awarded the Alpha Omega Phil Helene Award for all of his great work promoting Greek culture. And I don't know if he knows this, but he's also highly recommended on Rate My Professors at 4.8 out of 5 stars.
Wow.
Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Professor Samons.
Woo!
Thank you, John. I want to thank Ari and Foti and Andrea. Oh, good. This will let me do the slides. That's awesome. Yes, John was my student and then became my friend. Has been my friend now for very many years. We won't say how long that is either. He actually got me to dance once, too. We're definitely not going to talk about that. That will be explained in due course. I would like to say that the reason I agreed to do this tonight was because I've had so many good times here at the Meliotas Center before, but in fact this is the first time I've ever been in this building, which is shocking, considering how many things I've done at the consulate and other events I've been involved with over the years, but I'm delighted to be here. But the real reason I said I would come tonight was because I thought it would be the first talk I'd ever given where I'd be allowed to drink. while I was actually speaking. This has been a dream of mine. So tonight, I'm going to realize that dream. Here we are. Okay, very good. So yeah, it's a kind of enigmatic subject here. When I was told, I just heard I'm supposed to be the educational part of the evening. I don't know if I was prepared for that. I'll do my best. Of course, you're all familiar with Macedonia, and let's see if I can make this work. Here we go. Forward. All right. So here we have a slide that shows in yellow there the core region of Macedonia in classical antiquity before Alexander's father, Philip II, came to power. And in orange there you see the expansion. In the orange there you see the expansion of the Macedonian control during the first part of Philip's lifetime and campaign. It's interesting that the Macedonians, of course, this has been a somewhat interesting subject even in antiquity about who exactly the Macedonians were. The Greeks themselves thought, well, they're very interesting people, and they're certainly Greek. The Greeks had an interesting way of determining this. It was, were you allowed to participate in the Olympic Games or not? And one of the kings of Macedon, Alexander I, showed up in Olympia probably in 504 BC and said he wanted to participate in the games. And this led to a kind of, get the referees together and decide here, is Alexander of Macedon going to be allowed to participate in the games? And he explained to them, well, my ancestors come from Argos. And anyway, they did their due diligence and they decided, yes, he can participate. So as early as that, the Greeks had made a decision about Macedon as part of Greece, and later Macedonians participated in the Olympic Games, including Philip and Alexander. But it is true that the idea of Greekness comes about much later in antiquity, something that you can define as specifically Greek, meaning different from everything else. And this has been a hard thing for me to accept as someone who's been teaching Greek history for 32 years and studying it for about 40 years, is that as late as the 600s, 700s or 600s BC, the Greeks are still not using the term Hellenes about themselves. For example, Homer never uses that term. And when I started reading early Greek poetry, one of the things I found super interesting was how other peoples made their way into that poetry and are treated as if not Greek adjacent peoples who were really important to the Greeks. And one of those people are the Lydians. Here they are in Asia Minor. You probably have heard of Croesus of Lydia. He figures prominently in Herodotus' history. The Lydians definitely weren't Greeks. And the Greeks didn't think they were Greeks, but they thought they were very like us in many ways. And early Greeks adapted a lot of things from the Lydians, including coinage. You see those coins there on that slide. The coinage was invented by the Lydians, and Greeks took it over as soon as they saw it and thought this was a really good idea. And then the Greeks kind of perfected this issuing of coins, minting of coins. But the truth is that there was a real soup of people speaking Indo-European languages hanging around the Aegean basin between about 1500 BC and to today. And those languages, the language the Lydians spoke, the language the Phrygians spoke, the language the Thracians spoke, were all closely related to Greek. Macedonian was almost certainly a dialect of Greek. This is what linguists today believe. So it's not distant from even remote, even slightly distant the way Phrygian and Lydian are. It's just a dialect of Greek. But the Macedonians were different. They lived up in the hills. This is one of the reasons I've always been sort of a fan of the Macedonians. Coming from Arkansas myself, I consider myself a card-carrying hillbilly, and I'm proud of that heritage. My people make alcohol too, and maybe not legally, but the Macedon is a country of mountains, then with some flatter land down towards the Aegean. Alexander very famously, when his men got mad at him once and they wanted to go back to Greece from their 8 years of tramping around the Middle East and Asia, he gave them a speech in which he said, listen, my father found you a people wearing skins and turned you into a people who wear cloaks. He gave you law, and he taught you to live in cities, and he literally says, brought you down from the mountains, you bunch of hillbillies. I mean, this is almost there. If it was a word for hillbilly in Greek, it would have been right in that speech. Now, he was exaggerating terribly. We know he's exaggerating. But it is true that the Macedonians didn't do certain things that the southern Greeks did, like they didn't live in polis. They didn't live in city-states. So all of Macedon was ruled by a king. And the southern part of Greece was not like that at all. So when the southern Greeks, the Athenians and Spartans and Corinthians and Thebans, looked to the north, they saw this large kingdom where power was handed down from king to son, and then sometimes there were some assassinations, quite frequently in fact, that was got in the way of the safe transfer of power. And those kings were confirmed in their rule by the Macedonian army. So the support of the army was incredibly important in Macedonian government. But this all seemed very strange to southern Greeks who were used to the transfer of power on an annual basis where you elect magistrates, new magistrates come into power. That happened in Sparta, that happened in Corinth, that happened in Athens. All Greek city-states operated that way. But I think that what happened with Macedon is you have what I would like to think of as a remnant population of the earliest Greeks that entered the Balkans, probably between 2000 and 1600 BC. And we're pretty sure those people lived in kingdoms. The southern Greeks believed that they had come from the north. And I think that's the most likely explanation of what's going on in Macedon and Epirus, is that you have remnant populations of the earlier migrations into Greece. It's possible that it's a later migration as well, but I tend to think it's probably the earlier. So how do you get city-states and polis and people electing magistrates and tribes and all the things we know about classical Greek government? I tend to think that those things developed as a system for moving Greeks. That when the Greeks moved south, they organized themselves in a certain way, and that organization then gets reflected in later Greek government. That's just a theory. Another neat thing, though, about the Arab Macedon, of course, is it's famous for wine. This is Olympia here, where Alexander I participated. And we see one of his coins there. You notice that coin minted by Alexander I of Macedon has a horse on it and two very long spears. Of course, the Macedonians are going to be famous for their cavalry and the use of that long spear, the sarissa. The cavalry used a shorter version than the infantry, but still they use these spears. This reminds me of something I'm sure that John Pappas will remember. This is Samons' law of cavalry in antiquity, which is that the more north you go in Greece, the better the cavalry are. The Spartans had terrible cavalry, absolutely awful. The Athenians, okay. Thebans, pretty good. Thessalians, really good. Macedonians, very best. So this is easy to remember. The farther north you get, the better the cavalry. I should have talked about this. Culturally, if you ask yourself, well, what was Macedon like if they didn't have a city-state, Did they have Greek-style culture? And the answer to that is clearly yes. The physical remnants of Macedon show it well within the cultural parameters of Greece. If we look at the archaeology, art, architecture, etc., that just happens to be things that were left behind when Philip, Alexander's father, Philip's tomb was discovered and excavated in the 1970s, which was a fantastic find, one of the most amazing things that's happened in Greek history in the last 50 years. One of the things they found was this incredible burial box here of solid gold, 24 pounds of gold. You can imagine such a thing. There's not any gold. There's one place where you can get gold in Macedon. There's only 3 places in ancient Greece where you can get precious metals. The Athenians, by the way, controlled all 3 of them at the height of their power. I'm sure that's just a coincidence. One of them is near Macedon, but not in Macedon. The thing about gold is you pretty much have to take it from people. I found personally, they just won't give it to you. You can ask, may I have your gold? And the answer is generally no. But the Macedonians weren't the only Greek people who knew how to get gold. But the point I really wanted to make is that Macedon, the core of Macedonia, is in fact the core of some of the most amazing Greek wines and Greek grapes. Xinomavro, of course, the region in which the Xinomavro grape is grown today pretty much maps directly onto what was the core of ancient Macedonia. It's really remarkable. You can see that in this slide here, which you see the Nausa region there in red, which is the most famous region for Xinomavro. And you can see, if I go back, that there you go. I mean, it's pretty much ancient Macedonia. But it wasn't just wine that was the only part of Greek culture that the Macedonians were engaged in. They were great patrons of literature and the arts. And this is something I think not a lot of people know about, that it was Alexander I. I keep mentioning this guy. He was inviting the best poets, like people like Pindar and Macedonides, to Macedonia to write and perform. You might know the Athenian dramatic poet Euripides in the late 400s BC. He ended his life in Macedonia. He went up there to write and for performances of his plays to be put on. So Macedon was extremely important and supporting the culture that was being produced all over the rest of Greece, especially in Athens, but all over the rest of Greece. But the mentioning of wine reminds me that having taught college students now for 33 years, there's certain things I feel obligated to share with them now I teach a lot of freshmen too, so every fall I have 120 freshmen in Greek civilization. And they're 18, 19 years old, and of course, so they don't know anything about alcohol, for example. Nothing at all. And so I've taken it on myself to try to explain to them certain things about this strange substance, alcohol and wine, and I have to explain to them where wine comes from, and how fermented, and then this substance, alcohol, was produced, which allows it to be stored and shipped over long distances, and saved for long periods of time, etc. But I warn them every year, that if you drink this stuff, if you drink too much of it, it will produce a certain effect, and that effect is known as inebriation. They don't know what I'm talking about, of course. I have to explain to them. Well, how do we know, Professor Samons, if someone is inebriated? And I say, well, I've learned over the years there are some things you can notice. If someone is saying or doing things that they would not normally say or do, then it's likely that they are inebriated. And that answer worked for a long time, but about 10 years ago it occurred to me that there is an absolutely sure way to determine whether someone is inebriated or not. This will work absolutely. Now I'm talking about the modern world, not the ancient world. All right. But you can just ask yourself this question: are they dancing? If they are dancing, they are probably inebriated. I'm not talking about this kind of problem, cultural dancing. I'm talking about this thing, okay? You think you see in the discotheques and the clubs. If they're dancing, you can bet they're inebriated. Alexander the Great, of course, liked his wine, and Plutarch tells us that he was quite fond of sitting over his cup and drinking with his buddies. But it wasn't the wine, he said. It wasn't that he was trying to be inebriated, which you could have told because he wasn't dancing. But the thing about Alexander, Plutarch says, is he liked conversation. And the wine was there to inspire conversation. And of course, this is a very big part of Greek culture, that the consumption of wine and conversation, and we're not talking about what the weather's going to be tomorrow, we're talking about a different kind of conversation. Conversations like Plato records in the Symposium, where the question they decide to talk about while they're drinking is, what is love? And they get some really weird answers too in that dialogue. Check that one out sometime. Of course, Plutarch also says that Alexander would only drink 1 cup of wine, but another Greek historian once commented, anybody that's seen a Macedonian wine cup will not be impressed by his abstinence. I mean, 1 cup, all right? These are very, very large cups. So the last thing I wanted to mention is the role that Macedon has played in what we might think of as the projection of Hellenism, projection of Greekness across time and space. And of course, Alexander plays a big role in that. Here's Alexander's conquests. The area he covered was about the size of the continental U.S., which is remarkable. Did it in 8 years, using basically people on foot. Obviously, Alexander's armies couldn't move any faster than a man can move on foot. So that feat alone is absolutely incredible. But of course, Alexander died very young, and what followed him were a set of Macedonian Hellenistic kingdoms, Greek kingdoms ruled by, oh yes, how did he do it, Professor Samons? Well, all right, we won't get into that, but, oh, forgot about that slide. Have any of you seen that movie?
Yep.
Is that the worst thing you've ever seen? I mean, I just asked myself the question. They chose an Irish guy to play Alexander the Great. Right? So, are there no Greek actors? Can someone? Paging Greece. Are there no Greek actors in the world? No, we chose an Irish guy. And the weirdest thing about that movie then is that he speaks with an Irish accent in the movie, and everybody else in the movie starts speaking with an Irish accent, I guess because they think that sounds Greek. It's a travesty. Anyway, I'm sorry. Disgusting. Back to the educational part of the program. How much wine has he had? Anyway, so these kingdoms that followed Alexander's conquests, which were all ruled by Macedonian monarchs, and that's why, of course, when the last of them falls in 30 BC, it's Cleopatra, who is conquered by the Roman Octavian, who will become Augustus, the last Macedonian queen of Egypt. But Egypt had been ruled by Macedonian kings and queens for the 300 years before that, and the whole Near East was ruled by Macedonian kings. What we think of today as Syria and the Levant, much of Mesopotamia, all of Asia Minor, all of the Balkan Peninsula, all ruled by Greek monarchs until they were successively conquered by the Romans. But of course, during this period, a lot of important things happened, and one of the things happened is that Greek was established as the lingua franca of this entire region. You know, the modern Greek that the New Testament is written in, called Kini, right? Which just means common, because it was common to this entire region. Greek was spoken. If you were an educated person in all of these regions, you had to speak Greek. And you had to know about Greek culture, Greek architecture, Greek literature. It's influenced all of these cultures. So you get things like this. This is an Armenian temple in the 1st century AD. I mean, it was pretty obvious what they were looking at when they decided to make this temple. And you go and look at the coins, and you see the absolutely almost slavish imitation of Greek coins. Cavafy has a wonderful poem about this, about a monarch in Armenia who's producing a coin, and he says very clearly it has to be in the Greek style, and it has to be just this way, and the letters must be Greek, you know. Really capturing this effort to get into that cultural stratum that was Greekness that had been established by that time. We owe Alexander and the Macedonians for that projection of Greekness across the Near Eastern and Eastern Mediterranean world. I'm not claiming there weren't some downsides for that. Empires always have downsides. But the kind of imperialism that the Macedonians embraced, and ultimately the Romans did too, was pretty cosmopolitan and fairly respectful of people's human rights. And staying out of people's lives and letting them worship the gods they want to worship was something that the Hellenistic monarchies embraced, and Rome would embrace it too, with some important exceptions. Occasionally Judaism, occasionally Christianity. That's true. But Christianity, as it comes down to us, of course, there's another projection of Hellenic values all the way into Washington, D.C. And why they put Abraham Lincoln in a Greek temple is something, and you've got to ask yourself that question. He's got to be the least Greek of all American leaders. But too bad, you get a Greek temple, Abraham. But we get the Greek New Testament, of course, written in the 1st century and 2nd century AD in Greek, because that was the language. If you wanted to communicate with a large number of people, that's the language you're going to have to write in. And you know, it's at this point that I have to say, I won't go off on my whole dualism rant here, but I'll just say that it's something that pre-Christian and Christian Hellenism shares. The pre-Christian pagan Hellenic world and the post-Christian Hellenic world both rejected the idea that you can divide the universe up into good guys and bad guys. And that there is simply good forces and evil forces. There are good gods and there are bad gods. Right? And the physical world is necessarily evil, and the spiritual world is the only thing that's good. Hellenism, in both its forms, rejects that idea. Right? God created the heavens and the earth. Christ is incarnate as a human, born of the Virgin Mary. Right? That's a pretty strong endorsement that the physical body is not evil. And this was something that Hellenism really wrestled with, because it was the strongest counter philosophy running around the ancient world, was this dualistic idea that you can divide everything into evil and good, and you've got to make sure, you know, that you're on the side against the flesh and on the side of the good God versus the evil God, who's just as powerful as the good God, he's just evil. That's not the way paganism, it's not the way Homer looked at the world, it's not the way the New Testament or the Old Testament look at the world. So, when you think about, for example, this will be my final point, something like wine, and the relationship to this idea that rejects dualism. You know, I was taking communion last Sunday, and thinking to myself, why wine? Why, when we celebrate the Eucharist, are we taking wine and bread? I mean, if you think about it, Christ might have chosen other things, right? I mean, he could have chosen lamb. I mean, that seems funny, but Lamb of God, right, that's a real thing. He might have chosen fish, because, as he says to the apostles, I'm going to make you fishers of men. So why choose wine instead of one of those things, or any number of things? But to me, wine is such a beautiful example of the combination of two things. The grapes themselves, which are a gift from God, right? Man didn't invent grapes. They're just here. But we have to cultivate them, right? It's on us to change them, to do something to them, to take that gift of God, that part of the physical world, which is not evil but beautiful and good, and do something to it as human beings. That's what wine is, yeah? So it's two things. It's a gift of God, it's divine, and it's a product of human beings. It has those two natures, just as Christ does. So, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Samons. He will be here all evening, so if you guys have questions or want to speak with him, he knows a lot about Greek history, a lot about a lot of things. But up next, we have a special guest in the house. We have the Proxeno, Mr. Symeon Tegos, who's going to give us a few words.
Good evening all. George, Priscilla, καλησπέρα σε όλους. So, Professor, I'm glad I was late and you talked first. And I'll tell you why. Macedonia is a very personal thing for me. You remember this core part that you saw there? This is where I come from. This is where I grew up. Pure Macedonian, cannot be more. So my father was an agronomer engineer, and yes, in the fields of Macedonia, a hillbilly, a country boy, was growing up, and my mother was part of Andronikos team, archaeologist, and she was taking us to school. Actually, I was 6 when I entered in this place that you saw. So, when some fakes pretend to be something they are not, I take it very personally. Thank God I'm among friends and they won't misunderstand me. But the truth is, when somebody say things about Macedonia, it doesn't just make 2.5 million Macedonians very angry, which is a very bad idea to me. But also, it's a direct hit to my childhood, where I grew up. In these fields that you saw, I was always with my father, in the peaches, in the cherries, yes, in the grapes. And this is where I had my first fight, where I had my first everything. Then we moved to Thessaloniki, which is like 70 kilometers from Veria, where actually I was grew up, and next to Vergina. So, I'm very happy that I had this opportunity today to share with you what us Macedonians feel about the world. You know, the Hellenistic kingdom and Greekness is not in any doubt. Nobody doubted, even our northern neighbors, they know very well what Macedonia is. The world, I don't know if you noticed, is getting very strange lately. And trying to make sense of it, you need roots. You need to know where you belong and where you come from. And we Greeks, all of us, even from Peloponnesus. I'm just making, I know there are many Peloponnesians here. We love them. Greeks know where we come from, Professor. We know very well who we are and what we do, and we're very proud of who we are. So, just to clarify, Macedonia was, is, and will always be Greece. And please don't make any Macedonian upset because it's a very bad idea. So, thank you, John, for doing this. It's the first Macedonian event I have the honor to participate. This is who I am, this is my childhood, this is who Greeks are. All those people here, we know exactly who we are, where we come from, because we are Greeks. No matter where you are geographically, your heart, your culture, which by the way, is very hard to imitate. We gave light to the world. Even Christianity wouldn't have the chance without our language, our culture. So, we are proud of who we are, and I couldn't be more proud of the Greeks here in the United States that represent us so much better than an angry Macedonian could always be. But the truth is, I'm so proud of these people, Professor, because they are the best representatives you can have for Greece. It's not the temples, it's not the language, it's the people. It's the people that you see tonight, and I'm seeing every day. Sometimes they make me crazy, but I really love them. So I have to thank you all for being here tonight, and I have to thank you all for representing our country, our regions, our culture, who we are in this beautiful, new, brave, powerful world. Thank you so much. Thank you, John, for organizing the thing. Congratulations. I know they will be great. Thank you.